Early Muslim conquests. The early Muslim conquests, also referred to as the Arab conquests, began with the Islamic prophet Muhammad in the 7th century. He established a new unified polity in the Arabian Peninsula, which under the subsequent Rashidun and Umayyad Caliphates saw a century of rapid expansion. The resulting empire stretched from the borders of China and the Indian subcontinent, across Central Asia, the Middle East, North Africa, and parts of Europe, Sicily and the Iberian Peninsula to the Pyrenees. Edward Gibbon writes in the History of the Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire. Under the last of the Umayyads, the Arabian Empire extended 200 days' journey from east to west, from the confines of Tartary and India to the shores of the Atlantic Ocean. We should vainly seek the indissoluble union and easy obedience that pervaded the government of Augustus and the Antonines, but the progress of Islam diffused over this ample space a general resemblance of manners and opinions. The language and laws of the Quran were studied with equal devotion at Samarkand in the Far East and Seville in the West. The Arabian language was adopted as the popular idiom in all the provinces to the westward of the Tigris. The Muslim conquests brought about the collapse of the Sassanid Empire and a great territorial loss for the Byzantine Empire. The reasons for the Muslim success are hard to reconstruct in hindsight, primarily because only fragmentary sources from the period have survived. Fred McGraw suggests that formation of a state in the Arabian Peninsula and ideological, that is, religious, coherence and mobilization was a primary reason why the Muslim armies in the space of 100 years were able to establish the largest pre-modern empire until that time. Most historians agree as well that the Sassanid Persian and Byzantine Roman empires were militarily and economically exhausted from decades of fighting one another. It has been suggested that some Jews and Christians in the Sassanid Empire and Jews and Monophysites in Syria and Egypt were dissatisfied and welcomed the Muslim forces, largely because of religious conflict in both empires. It has also been suggested that Syriac Christians reinterpreted the events of the conquest to serve a political or religious interest. Background: Arabia was a region that hosted a number of different cultures, some urban and others nomadic Bedouin. Arabian society was divided along tribal and clan lines, with the most important divisions being between the southern and northern tribal associations. Both the Roman and Persian empires competed for influence in Arabia by sponsoring clients, and in turn Arabian tribes sought the patronage of the two rival empires to bolster their own ambitions. The Lakhmid kingdom, which covered parts of what is now southern Iraq and northern Saudi Arabia, was a client of Persia, and in 602 the Persians deposed the Lakhmids to take over the defense of the southern frontier themselves. This left the Persians exposed and overextended, helping to set the stage for the collapse of Persia later that century. Southern Arabia, especially what is now Yemen, had for thousands of years been a wealthy region that had been a center of the spice trade. Yemen had been at the center of an international trading network linking Eurasia to Africa, and Yemen had been visited by merchants from East Africa, Europe, the Middle East, and India. Little is known of the pre-Islamic religions of Arabia, but it is known that the Arabs worshipped a number of gods such as Al-Lat, Manat, Al-Uzza and Hubal. There were also Jewish and Christian communities in Arabia. Prophet Muhammad, a merchant of Mecca, started to have visions in which he claimed that the archangel Gabriel had told him that he was the last of the prophets, continuing the work of Jesus Christ and the prophets of Tanakh. After coming into conflict with the elite of Mecca, Prophet Muhammad fled to the city of Yathrib, which was renamed Medina. At Yathrib, Prophet Muhammad founded the first Islamic state and by 630 conquered Mecca. The prolonged and escalating Byzantine Sassanid wars of the 6th and 7th centuries and the recurring outbreaks of bubonic plague of Justinian, left both empires exhausted and weakened in the face of the sudden emergence and expansion of the Arabs. The last of these wars ended with victory for the Byzantines. Emperor Heraclius regained all lost territories, and restored the True Cross to Jerusalem in 629. The war against Zoroastrian Persia, whose people worshipped the fire god Ahura Mazda, had been portrayed by Heraclius as a holy war in defense of the Christian faith. The idea of a holy war against the fire worshippers, as the Christians called the Zoroastrians, had aroused much enthusiasm, leading to an all-out effort to defeat the Persians. Nevertheless, neither empire was given any chance to recover, as within a few years they were overrun by the advances of the Arabs, newly united by Islam, which, according to Howard Johnston, can only be likened to a human tsunami. In late 620s Prophet Muhammad had already managed to conquer and unify much of Arabia under Muslim rule, and it was under his leadership that the first Muslim-Byzantine skirmishes took place in response to Byzantine incursions. Just a few months after Heraclius and the Persian general Shah Barats agreed on terms for the withdrawal of Persian troops from occupied Byzantine eastern provinces in 629, Arab and Byzantine troops confronted each other at the Battle of Mutu as a result of Byzantine vassals murdering a Muslim emissary. Prophet Muhammad died in 632 and was succeeded by Abu Bakr, the first caliph with undisputed control of the entire Arab Peninsula after the successful Ridda Wars, which resulted in the consolidation of a powerful Muslim state throughout the peninsula. Swords and spears were the major weapons of the Muslims, and armor was either mail or leather. As the caliphate spread, the Muslims were influenced by the peoples they conquered, the Turks in Central Asia, the Persians, and the Romans in Syria. By the Umayyad period, the caliphate was divided into a number of regional armies, stationed in the provinces, being made of mostly Arab tribes who were paid monthly by the Diwan al-Jaysh, war ministry. Muslim conquest of the Levant, 634 to 641. The province of Syria was the first to be wrested from Byzantine control. Arab-Muslim raids that followed the Ridda Wars prompted the Byzantines to send a major expedition into southern Palestine, which was defeated by the Arab forces at the Battle of Ajnadain, 634. In the Battle of the Mud Fort outside of Bela in the Jordan River Valley in January 635, the Arabs won another victory. After a siege of 6 months the Arabs took Damascus, but Emperor Heraclius later retook it. At the Battle of Yarmouk, August 636, the Arabs were victorious, defeating Heraclius. Syria was ordered to be abandoned to the Muslims, with Heraclius reportedly saying, "Peace be with you, Syria, what a beautiful land you will be for your enemy." On the heels of their victory, the Arab armies took Damascus again in 636, with Baalbek, Homs, and Hama to follow soon afterwards. After a 2-year siege, the garrison of Jerusalem surrendered rather than starve to death. Under the terms of the surrender, Caliph Umar promised to tolerate the Christians of Jerusalem and not to turn churches into mosques. The loss to the Muslims of Jerusalem, the holiest city to Christians, proved to be the source of much resentment in Christendom. The city of Caesarea Maritima continued to withstand the Muslim siege, as it could be supplied by sea, until it was taken by in 640. In the mountains of Asia Minor, the Muslims enjoyed less success, with the Romans adopting the tactic of shadowing warfare, refusing to give battle to the Muslims, while the people retreated into castles and fortified towns. In the frontier area where Anatolia met Syria, the Roman state evacuated the entire population and laid waste to the countryside, creating a no-man's land where any invading army would find no food. At the same time, the Romans began a policy of launching raids via sea on the coast of the Caliphate with the aim of forcing the Muslims to keep at least some of their forces to defend their coastlines, thus limiting the number of troops available for an invasion of Anatolia. Unlike Syria with its plains and deserts which favored the offensive, the mountainous terrain of Anatolia favored the defensive, and for centuries afterwards, the line between Christian and Muslim lands ran along the border between Anatolia and Syria. Muslim conquest of Egypt, 639 to 642. The Byzantine province of Egypt held strategic importance for its grain production, naval yards, and as a base for further conquests in Africa. The majority of the Roman forces in Egypt were locally raised Coptic forces, intended to serve more as a police force. Since the vast majority of Egyptians lived in the Nile River Valley, surrounded on both the eastern and western sides by desert, Egypt was felt to be a relatively secure province. In December 639, Muslims entered the Sinai with the moderate force and took Pelusium, on the edge of the Nile River Valley, and then defeated a Roman counter-attack at Byblos. Contrary to expectations, the Arabs did not head for Alexandria, the capital of Egypt, but instead for a major fortress known as Babylon located at what is now Cairo. The Arab forces won a major victory at the Battle of Heliopolis, 640, but they found it difficult to advance further because major cities in the Nile Delta were protected by water and because of lack of the machinery to break down city fortifications. The Arabs laid siege to Babylon, and its starving garrison surrendered in April 641. Afterwards, the Arabs turned north into the Nile Delta and laid siege to Alexandria. The city was capitulated in September 642. According to Hugh Kennedy, of all the early Muslim conquests, that of Egypt was the swiftest and most complete. Seldom in history can so massive a political change have happened so swiftly and been so long-lasting. Though most of Egypt is desert, the Nile River Valley has some of the most productive and fertile farmland in the entire world, which had made Egypt the granary of the Roman Empire. Control of Egypt meant that the Caliphate could weather droughts without the fear of famine, laying the basis for the future prosperity of the Caliphate. The War at Sea. The Roman Empire had traditionally dominated the Mediterranean and the Black Sea with major naval bases at Constantinople, Acre, Alexandria, and Carthage. In 652, the Arabs won their first victory at sea off Alexandria, which was followed by the temporary Muslim conquest of Cyprus. In the Battle of the Masts off Cape Chilidonia in Anatolia, Turkey, in 655, the Muslims defeated the Roman fleet in a series of boarding actions. As a result, the Romans began a major expansion of their navy, which was matched by the Arabs, leading to a naval arms race. From the early 8th century onward, the Muslim fleet would launch annual raids on the coastline on the Roman Empire in Anatolia and Greece. As part of the arms race, both sides sought new technology to improve their warships. The Muslim warships had a larger forecastle, which was used to mount a stone-throwing engine. The Romans invented Greek fire, an incendiary weapon that led the Muslims to cover their ships with water-soaked cotton. Muslim conquest of Mesopotamia and Persia, 633 to 651. After an Arab incursion into Sasanian territories, the energetic King Yazdjerd III, who had just ascended the Persian throne, raised an army to resist the conquerors. However, the Persians suffered a devastating defeat at the Battle of Al-Qadisiyah in 636. Little is known all about the Battle of Al-Qadisiyah other than it lasted for several days by the banks of the river Euphrates in what is now Iraq and ended with the Persian force being annihilated. As a result of Al-Qadisiyah, the Arab Muslims gained control over the whole of Iraq, including Ctesiphon, the capital city of the Sassanids. The Persians lacked sufficient forces to make use of the Zagros Mountains to stop the Arabs, having lost the prime of their army at Al-Qadisiyah. The Persian forces withdrew over the Zagros Mountains and the Arab army pursued them across the Iranian plateau, where the fate of the Sasanian Empire was sealed at the Battle of Nahawand. After Nahawand, the Persian state collapsed with Yezdegerd fleeing further east and various Moors bands bending their knees in submission to the Arabs. As the conquerors slowly covered the vast distances of Iran punctuated by hostile towns, Yazdegerd III retreated, finally taking refuge in Khorasan, where he was assassinated by a local satrap, a provincial governor in the ancient Persian Empire, in 651. Muslim conquest of the Maghreb 647–708. Arab forces began launching sporadic raiding expeditions into Cyrenaica, modern northeast Libya, and beyond soon after their conquest of Egypt. Byzantine rule in northwest Africa at the time was largely confined to the coastal plains, while autonomous Berber polities controlled the rest. In 670 Arabs founded the settlement of Kairouan, which gave them a forward base for further expansion. Arab forces were able to capture Carthage in 698 and Tangiers by 708. After the fall of Tangiers, many Berbers joined the Muslim army. Umayyad conquest of Hispania 711–721. The Muslim conquest of Iberia is notable for the brevity and unreliability of the available sources. After the Visigothic king of Spain Witiza died in 710, the kingdom experienced a period of political division. The Visigothic nobility was divided between the followers of Witiza and the new king Roderick. Utla, Witiza's son, had fled to Morocco after losing the succession struggle, and Muslim tradition states that he asked the Muslims to invade Spain. Starting in the summer of 710, the Muslim forces in Morocco had launched several successful raids into Spain, which demonstrated the weakness of the Visigothic state. Taking advantage of the situation, the Muslim Berber commander, Tariq ibn Zad, who was stationed in Tangiers at the time, crossed the straits with an army of Arabs and Berbers in 711. Most of the invasion force of 15,000 was Berbers, with the Arabs serving as an elite force. They landed on the Rock of Gibraltar in April 711. After defeating the forces of King Roderick at the river Guadalli in July 711, Muslim forces advanced, capturing cities of the Gothic kingdom one after another. The capital of Toledo surrendered peacefully. Some of the cities surrendered with agreements to pay tribute, and local aristocracy retained a measure of former influence. The Spanish Jewish community welcomed the Muslims as liberators from the oppression of the Catholic Visigothic kings. In 712, another larger force of 18,000 from Morocco crossed the Straits of Gibraltar to link up with the previous force of Talavera. The events of the subsequent 10 years, the details of which are obscure, included the capture of Barcelona and Narbonne, and a raid against Toulouse, followed by an expedition into Burgundy in 725. The last large-scale raid to the north ended with a Muslim defeat at the Battle of Tours at the hands of the Franks led by Charles Martel in 732. Explanations of success of the early conquests. The rapidity of the early conquests has received various explanations. Contemporary Christian writers conceived them as God's punishment visited on their fellow Christians for their sins. Early Muslim historians viewed them as a reflection of the religious zeal of the conquerors and evidence of divine favor. The theory that the conquests are explainable as an Arab migration triggered by economic pressures enjoyed popularity early in the 20th century, but has largely fallen out of favor among historians, especially those who distinguish the migration from the conquests that preceded and enabled it. Although other scholars argue that the conquests were a planned military venture already underway during Prophet Muhammad's lifetime, Fred Donner writes that the advent of Islam revolutionized both the ideological bases and the political structures of the Arabian society, giving rise for the first time to a state capable of an expansionist movement. According to Chase F. Robinson, it is likely that Muslim forces were often outnumbered, but, unlike their opponents, they were fast, well-coordinated and highly motivated. Another key reason was the weakness of the Byzantine and Sasanian empires, caused by the wars they had waged against each other in the preceding decades with alternating success. The Sasanian Empire, which had lost the latest round of hostilities with the Byzantines, was also affected by a crisis of confidence, and its elites suspected that the ruling dynasty had forfeited the favor of the gods. The Arab military advantage was increased when Christianized Arab tribes who had served imperial armies as regular or auxiliary troops switched sides and joined the Arabian coalition. Arab commanders also made liberal use of agreements to spare lives and property of inhabitants in case of surrender and extended exemptions from paying tribute to groups who provided military services to the conquerors. Additionally, the Byzantine persecution of Christians opposed to the Chalcedonian Creed in Syria and Egypt alienated elements of those communities and made them more open to accommodation with the Arabs once it became clear that the latter would let them practice their faith undisturbed as long as they paid tribute. The conquests were further secured by the subsequent large-scale migration of Arabian peoples into the conquered lands.